Anaya Qureshi had always lived life with intention. A soft-spoken yet determined woman from Lahore, she carried dreams in her heart that went beyond the ordinary. Raised in a middle-class household by loving, hard-working parents, she was taught the value of honesty, loyalty, and resilience. Her father was a retired school principal, and her mother ran a small home-based tailoring business. They didn't have much in terms of luxury, but their house overflowed with warmth, laughter, and love. From a young age, Anaya knew she wanted to do something meaningful. She studied mass communication at university and eventually became a content editor for a local publishing firm. She loved telling stories, real ones, emotional ones. Her work reflected her empathetic heart. She believed in fairy tale endings and good people and love that lasted. Despite the cynicism of the world around her, she remained optimistic. It was during a university alumni event that she met Danielle Malek, confident, charming, and slightly older. Danielle was a budding entrepreneur working in tech. He was everything she wasn't: spontaneous, bold, a little reckless, and yet something about him grounded her. Their first conversation stretched into hours, and within weeks, they were inseparable. Their love blossomed quickly. He would surprise her at work with flowers, send her poetry over text, and dream out loud about the future they'd build together. Her friends warned her that he seemed too fast, too intense, but Anaya silenced their doubts. She believed in giving her heart fully, and she did. Within a year, they were married in a beautiful nikah ceremony, surrounded by friends and family. Their small apartment was filled with mismatched furniture, takeout dinners, and dreams written on sticky notes. Anaya adjusted her work schedule to support Danielle as he tried to grow his business. They weren't rich, but they were happy, or so she believed. 2 years into their marriage, Anaya received the news that changed everything. She was pregnant. The moment the 2 pink lines appeared on the test, she laughed and cried at once. Danielle had always talked about starting a family, and now that dream was becoming real. When she told him, he seemed surprised but pleased. They spent the evening imagining baby names, debating nursery colors, and talking about what kind of parents they'd be. Anaya began documenting every moment: the first sonogram, her pregnancy cravings, little voice notes to her unborn baby. Life, at that point, felt like a beautiful story unfolding exactly as it should. She imagined raising a child with a man she loved, building a home full of laughter and late-night lullabies. She envisioned bedtime stories, family vacations, shared responsibilities, and growing old together. But sometimes, the most peaceful chapters are merely the calm before a storm. Anaya had no idea that behind Danielle's late-night meetings and distracted conversations, a different story was being written, one that would shatter her world and rewrite her future. The first signs were subtle, like small ripples on the surface of an otherwise still lake. At first, Anaya didn't think much of Danielle's late nights. He had always been ambitious, often staying up late working on his startup. In fact, she admired his drive. It was one of the qualities that had drawn her to him. But as her pregnancy progressed, his long hours began to feel different. They were no longer filled with passion or purpose. Instead, they were marked by vague excuses and increasingly distant glances. He stopped joining her for dinner. When she waited up for him, he'd tell her not to, claiming he didn't want to disturb her rest. He rarely asked about the baby anymore. Once excited about every little detail, now he barely looked at the sonogram pictures. When she showed him a tiny pair of shoes she bought online, he nodded absently, eyes still fixed on his phone. Anaya chalked it up to stress. After all, startups were demanding, and she knew he was trying to make their future secure. He's just under pressure, she told herself. He'll come around. Her friends agreed. Men get overwhelmed too, one of them said. Just focus on your baby, he'll be fine. but the signs kept piling up. Daniel began keeping his phone on silent. He'd get calls and step out to take them, saying it was business stuff. She noticed new cologne in the bathroom, shirts she hadn't seen before, and unfamiliar names popping up on his notifications. When she reached for his phone once to check the time, he snapped at her, something he had never done before. His once affectionate tone was now curt, dismissive. "Don't you trust me?" he asked coldly. Anaya didn't answer. She wanted to. She wanted to scream that yes, she trusted him, but he was making it impossible. She wanted to cry, to demand the truth, but the baby growing inside her reminded her to stay calm for both their sakes. Instead, she blamed herself. Maybe she had become too emotional. Maybe the pregnancy was making her clingy or oversensitive. Maybe she wasn't attractive enough anymore. She stared at herself in the mirror, gently touching her growing belly, wondering if her changing body had pushed him away. She tried harder, cooked his favorite meals, wore makeup, kept the house spotless. But no matter what she did, Daniel's distance only grew. The emotional toll began to show. Anaya started losing sleep. Her appetite faded. Nights were the hardest, lying in bed alone, trying to ignore the voice in her head, whispering that something was deeply wrong. Her heart felt heavy all the time, her body aching not just from pregnancy, but from carrying the weight of loneliness. She cried quietly into her pillow, making sure not to wake him when he finally returned home. Sometimes he'd kiss her forehead without emotion, like a ritual he no longer believed in. Other times, he wouldn't even look at her, yet despite everything, she clung to love. She still believed in their story, believed that the man she married was just going through a phase. She told herself he'd come back, that once the baby arrived, things would change. She remembered how happy he was when she first told him they were expecting. She replayed that moment over and over like a mantra, refusing to let go of hope. Her family noticed her sadness, but Anaya brushed it off. "Just tired," she'd say, "pregnancy hormones." She didn't want to burden anyone with her fears, especially not her parents, who adored Daniel and had trusted him with their daughter. But inside, her soul was unraveling. She felt like a ghost in her own home, present but invisible. Each unanswered call, each excuse, each flicker of guilt in his eyes that he tried to hide, it all painted a picture she didn't want to admit was real. Still, she held on, not because she was weak, but because she had loved deeply. She held on because she was about to bring a new life into the world, and every inch of her hoped that their family would still be whole when that day came. But deep down, a quiet storm was beginning to rise in her chest. She just didn't know it yet. The truth didn't come in one dramatic moment. It came in fragments, tiny slivers of confirmation that slowly pieced together the reality. Anaya had been too afraid to face Dot. It was a Sunday afternoon. The sun soft against the windows, and Anaya was folding baby clothes, onesies, and tiny mittens while humming softly. Danielle was supposed to be at a client meeting, but something about the day felt strange. His scent had lingered longer that morning. A new shirt lay tossed on the bed, and she could sense something final in his goodbye. She didn't intend to check his phone, but when it vibrated on the sofa next to her with a name that wasn't saved, just an emoji and the words, "Miss me?" her heart stopped. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the screen. What she found was undeniable. A thread of messages. Flirty, familiar photos. One of them at a hotel. Voice notes, her voice, soft and sultry, nothing like the warmth of Anaya's tone. The woman spoke with ease, confidence, and casual cruelty. The tone of someone who knew she had won. Anaya's chest tightened. Her mouth went dry. She felt like she was falling, but the ground never came. Later that evening, Danielle returned, humming as if nothing had happened. She confronted him, not with screams, but with the crushing calm of someone who had cried too much already. She asked one question, "Who is she?" He didn't deny it. In fact, his face didn't even show guilt, just irritation. As if the truth was a burden he had grown tired of hiding. "Her name is Mahira," he said bluntly, avoiding her eyes. "We met at a conference months ago. It just happened. It just happened." Anaya stood there, 7 months pregnant, arms wrapped around her belly like she could shield the baby from this heartbreak. She had no words. He didn't offer an apology. No explanation. No regret. Mahira was a marketing executive, smart, sharp-tongued, and unapologetically bold. She was everything Daniel now claimed he needed: exciting, ambitious, uninhibited. She had known about Anaya, of course, but that didn't stop her. In fact, it seemed to thrill her, like winning a game. "She's different," Danielle said, not realizing how deeply the words would carve into Anaya's soul. "I didn't plan for this, but I feel alive with her." Alive, as if Anaya, the woman who supported him, cooked for him, prayed for him, and carried his child, had somehow dulled his spirit. Then came the final blow. "I want a divorce," he said quietly. "I'm going to be with her." The room spun. The walls seemed to fold in. She couldn't breathe, couldn't cry, couldn't scream. Her world collapsed silently while the life inside her continued to grow, oblivious to the chaos outside. The days that followed were darker than any she'd ever known. People whispered. Friends who once praised their marriage began to distance themselves. Some blamed her. Maybe you weren't enough for him. Others just watched quietly, uncomfortable with the misigns of it all. Her family was devastated. Her mother wept for her daughter's dignity. Her father, usually composed, was speechless with rage. But no one could truly understand what Anaya was going through. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was existential. It shook her sense of identity, of trust, of worth. Strangers online who found out through whispers and posts judged her. She must have done something wrong. Mahira, ever the strategist, painted herself as the woman who saved Danielle from a loveless marriage. Her social media was filled with curated smiles, filtered vacations, and captions like, "Sometimes you have to follow your heart, no matter the cost." Anaya watched it all in silence. She felt broken, abandoned, not just by her husband, but by society's silence, by the betrayal of expectations, by the idea that love was supposed to protect you. And all the while, her baby grew. Each kick reminded her that she had no time to collapse completely, that despite the storm around her, a new life was waiting, that she had to survive, not for him, not for anyone else, but for herself. And for the tiny heartbeat she carried with her every moment. She didn't know how she'd do it, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not how her story would end. At the days after Danielle walked out felt like a blur of endless gray. Anaya's world had been reduced to silence and survival. Every morning was a battle between her body that ached with the weight of pregnancy and her heart that felt like it had been hollowed out. Financial strain hit her immediately. Danielle, in his swift departure, had stopped contributing to household expenses. The apartment rent, groceries, medical bills, everything fell squarely on her shoulders. With her maternity leave approaching and savings nearly drained from months of supporting both Daniel's business and their household, she felt trapped. Her job as a content editor provided a modest income, but it was barely enough now that she had to prepare for a baby on her own. Every decision became a heavy calculation. Can I afford this medicine and still pay rent? Should I skip this prenatal test or borrow more money? What happens if I go into early labor and can't afford the hospital? Stress began affecting her health. Her appetite disappeared. She couldn't keep food down, her blood pressure spiked, and she often found herself dizzy and lightheaded. Her OBGYN warned her, "You need rest. Your baby feels everything. Stress is dangerous at this stage. But how could she rest when everything was crumbling? The emotional toll ran deeper than anyone could see. Nights were the worst. She would curl up on the far side of the bed, Daniel's side, still smelling traces of his cologne. The silence screamed at her. The emptiness of the home echoed every broken promise. She often cried quietly, whispering apologies to the baby growing inside her. I'm sorry you don't have a father here. I'm sorry I'm not stronger. I'm trying, baby. Please hold on. Her family was a mixture of anger and heartbreak. Her mother wanted to bring her home, but Anaya resisted. She didn't want to be seen as someone to be pitied. Her father, usually rational, spoke of legal action demanding accountability from Danielle, but courtrooms and lawyers were the last thing on Anaya's mind. She didn't want revenge, she wanted peace. Some friends disappeared. Conversations became awkward. People didn't know what to say. A few well-meaning ones suggested she forgive Danielle for the child's sake. Others implied that maybe her softness had let him walk all over her, but one friend, Zara, stood beside her. UNWA, AV, Ra showed up with groceries, helped set up the nursery corner, and held Anaya when the tears came. You don't have to be okay right now, she said, but I promise you will be. And when you are, you won't even recognize the woman you used to be. Despite the support, depression crept in like a slow fog. She began missing doctor appointments. She avoided mirrors. Some days she couldn't even muster the strength to shower. The future terrified her, raising a child alone, juggling bells, trying to be both mother and father. Her once bright dreams had become a shadow of survival. One afternoon about 2 weeks before her due date, she sat on the floor of her apartment surrounded by unopened baby gifts, ones she had ordered before her world shattered. She looked around at the chaos, the silence, and the fear, and something inside her finally cracked out. It wasn't a collapse, it was a shift. For the first time, she let herself scream. A deep primal cry that echoed off the walls and into the deepest parts of her soul. She wept for her broken heart, her lost trust, her abandoned dreams, and then she wiped her tears. She crawled to the mirror, looked into her puffy, swollen face, and whispered, "You are not going to let him break. You are not going to let this be the end of your story." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sudden, but it was real. Something inside her had turned. She got up, drank water, and made herself a meal. It tasted like nothing, but she finished it. She sat down with her hospital file and updated her birth plan alone, but in control. She emailed HR to sort her maternity paperwork. She folded the baby clothes and packed a hospital bag. No, the pain didn't vanish. The fear didn't disappear. But in the wreckage of everything she had lost, a quiet seed of determination had taken root. She wasn't doing it for Danielle. She wasn't doing it for anyone's approval. She was doing it for herself and for the little heartbeat inside, her that still chose her every day. The woman who had hit rock bottom was now starting to dig deep, and she would rise from there, not as a victim, but as a force. After the storm had passed, Anaya found herself standing in the wreckage, not just of her marriage, but of her identity, her expectations, and the life she once pictured so vividly. But something had changed. That primal moment of pain and clarity had planted the smallest seed of resolve inside her. She began with small, almost invisible steps. The first goal, wake up and make her bed. Then, eat at least 2 proper meals a day. Next, walk for 20 minutes, even if it was just around her living room. She started documenting her daily wins in a notebook, drank enough water, called the doctor, folded baby clothes. These might seem insignificant to others, but to her they were triumphs. Small acts of defiance against the darkness that had tried to consume her. One morning, While scrolling through her phone, she stumbled upon an online group for single mothers. Curious but hesitant, she joined. It wasn't therapy, but it was a lifeline. There were stories just like hers, women abandoned, heartbroken, pregnant, and alone, who had found their footing again. Some were already thriving, others were still struggling. But what bound them all was shared survival. Through their words, Anaya found herself healing. She began to participate more, sharing bits of her journey, her fears, her progress. The group became her digital family, offering comfort at 3 a.m. when loneliness threatened to swallow her whole. Inspired by the courage of others, she decided to seek professional help. She found a therapist who specialized in maternal mental health. Their sessions became sacred ground where Anaya unpacked the betrayal, the shame, the guilt, and the lingering self-doubt. She spoke freely, cried openly, and slowly began to see her story with fresh eyes, not as a failure, but as a beginning. Meanwhile, her career had taken a back seat during the chaos. But now, with maternity leave approaching its end and bills still piling up, she knew she had to reignite her passion. Writing had always been her outlet. She'd once dreamed of publishing essays and stories that spoke to real women, real pain. So she started a blog. It wasn't fancy, just a simple, clean space where she poured her truth. She wrote about being abandoned during pregnancy, about healing, about surviving loneliness. She posted without expecting anything, but within weeks, women from around the country began to respond. They thanked her for her honesty, for voicing the feelings they were too afraid to say out loud. Encouraged by their support, she began writing more consistently. Her blog was soon featured on a well-known women's platform. Offers followed guests, writing opportunities, podcast interviews, and eventually a small but steady income from her blog itself. It wasn't just financial progress, it was emotional validation. Then came the moment she had been both longing for and dreading. Birth of her child. On a cloudy Tuesday morning, with Zara by her side and tears in her eyes, Anaya gave birth to a baby boy. She named him Ryan, meaning gates of paradise, a name that symbolized the light that had come after so much darkness. The delivery was long and exhausting, and as she held her son for the first time, emotions surged through her: relief, gratitude, sadness, and strength. She looked down at his tiny face, so unaware of the turmoil that brought him here, and whispered, "We made it, baby. You and me." That moment changed everything. Motherhood awakened a fierceness in her she hadn't known existed. The anxiety, though still present, took a backseat to love. She began organizing her days with more purpose: baby schedules, work from home, writing gigs, and therapy sessions. She applied for part-time freelance editing roles and landed 2 clients. The money was modest, but it was hers, earned with her talent, her discipline, her resilience. A few months later, her blog post titled "Abandoned, Not Broken" went viral. Women from across the region messaged her, praising her courage and thanking her for sharing what they were too afraid to speak. A local parenting magazine approached her to write a column. Then a well-known NGO for single mothers reached out to partner with her for a speaking engagement. She was no longer just surviving, she was growing, step by step, into a version of herself that even she admired. Her first professional victory came, not with applause, but with an email, a confirmed payment for her writing. It was a small amount, but she sat with it for 10 full minutes, staring at it. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that she had gone from being broken on her living room floor to being paid for her voice. That night, she lit a candle, hugged Rayon close, and cried not from sadness, but from strength. She had faced the worst days of her life and somehow still risen, still shown up, still created something beautiful, and this was only the beginning. With every sunrise, Anaya felt a little more like herself. No, not the woman she used to be, but someone entirely new. She was no longer just a heartbroken wife or a single mother. She was a creator, a builder, a survivor. What had begun as a blog filled with late-night reflections evolved into something far greater. Her posts, raw and honest, began to resonate with thousands. She started receiving messages daily, women from all walks of life, thanking her for putting into words what they couldn't. They called her courageous. But Anaya knew it wasn't about bravery. It was about necessity. Speaking up had saved her. Encouraged by the traction her blog received, she decided to take a leap of faith and launch her own platform, a website focused on healing after betrayal, single motherhood, and reclaiming identity. She named it From Shattered to Strong. The name carried her journey in its essence. It wasn't just a blog anymore, it was a resource hub, a safe space, and soon, a small business with a modest loan from her father and the tech help of a freelancer she met in a single mom's networking group. She built an interactive site that offered articles, video talks, downloadable self-help journals, and even virtual support MEETUPS to generate income. She created a self-paced writing course for women looking to tell their stories, how to turn pain into purpose through words. She offered affordable coaching packages and partnered with mental health professionals to co-host WEBINARS. It was slow at first, but soon her email list grew, her sessions filled up, and the course began to bring in real income. Month by month, she tracked her finances with discipline. For the first time since Daniel had left, she didn't have to worry about whether she could pay her bills. She was financially independent. Her success wasn't just built on strategy, it was built on authenticity. She wasn't trying to sell perfection. She showed up to Instagram lives with her baby in her lap and no makeup on, talking about nights with no sleep and moments of doubt. Her vulnerability made her magnetic. People trusted her. Soon, local organizations began inviting her to speak. Her first speaking engagement was a small event at a women's co-working space. She was terrified, standing behind the mic with shaking hands. But as she looked out at the faces of women, some smiling, some crying, she found her voice. She spoke about betrayal, about motherhood, about the night she screamed into the silence and chose to live anyway. When she finished, the standing ovation wasn't loud, it was emotional. People hugged her. One woman said, "You made me feel like I can survive too." That single night sparked a new wave of opportunity. She was featured in a women's empowerment podcast. Her writing was picked up by a digital magazine. She began working with NGOs to develop programs for abandoned mothers. She even mentored a few women one-on-one, helping them write and publish their own stories. As her reputation grew, so did her confidence. One afternoon, with Rayon asleep beside her and her laptop open to her budgeting spreadsheet, she did something she never thought she'd do alone. She applied for a home loan. A few months later, she walked through the doors of a small but sunlit apartment, keys in hand, tears in her eyes. It wasn't extravagant, but it was hers. Every brick of that home had been earned through resilience, late-night work, and a heart that refused to stay broken. She painted Rayon's room in soft grays and blues, decorated the kitchen with photos of her and her son, and placed a simple frame on her desk that read, "She believed she could, so she did." That apartment became a haven, not just for her and Rayon, but for everything she was building. She began hosting small in-person workshops from her living room. Women came with notebooks, dreams, and pain. They left with plans, clarity, and hope. One of the proudest moments came when she was invited to speak at a national women's conference. She stood on a professional stage, this time in heels and confidence, speaking to an audience of over 500. Her story wasn't about victimhood, it was about vision, about choosing life again, not just surviving, but thriving. And through it all, Ryan grew. He was her shadow in the early days, curled beside her laptop as she typed. He sat in her lap during Zoom meetings, often becoming the highlight of the call. As he learned to walk, she celebrated every milestone like a private miracle. He was her why, her fuel. Every sleepless night, every anxious moment, every bold decision was made with him in mind. She didn't just support him, she led him. With love, with consistency, and with fierce pride. Every evening, she'd tuck him into bed and whisper, "We're building something beautiful, you and me." She had risen not from luck or revenge or handouts. She had risen from ashes, from betrayal, from loss. And she had built a life so rich with purpose, freedom, and power that she no longer feared what the future held. Anaya was no longer a woman defined by abandonment. She was a woman defined by what she did after Dot and the life she had now. It was one that no one could ever take from her again. While Anaya was rising, far away from her world of growth and healing, Daniel's life had begun to slowly unravel. What had once seemed like freedom, a fresh start with Mahira, the thrill of a new relationship, an escape from responsibility, began to lose its shine faster than he had imagined. Mahira, ambitious and unapologetic, had no interest in being a homemaker or sharing in Daniel's emotional burdens. What began as an affair charged with secrecy and adrenaline quickly turned into a relationship marked by power struggles and ego clashes. She had her own goals, her own career, and she didn't have the patience to play house with a man still. Haunted by guilt and half-truths, Daniel's startup, already struggling when he had left Anaya, began to spiral. With mounting pressure and little focus, he made poor decisions. Investors pulled out. One by one, clients disappeared. Within a year, the company folded quietly, with no fanfare or sympathy. Daniel, who once strutted with pride and charm, was now just another man in a cheap suit. Job hunting with a damaged reputation, he began reaching out to old contacts, many of whom ignored him. Some replied with curt, "Sorry, can't help." Others didn't respond at all. The industry had moved on, and so had people's respect. Mahira, frustrated with his lack of stability and progress, began pulling away. Arguments escalated. Eventually, she left him through a text message, no confrontation, no closure. A poetic mirror of what he had once done to Anaya, alone and jobless. Daniel found himself living in a rented single-room apartment, watching his savings dwindle. His social media, once filled with pictures of beach trips and expensive dinners, lay dormant now. The silence wasn't just online, it echoed through his life. One morning, as he scrolled mindlessly through Instagram, he stumbled upon a clip of a women's empowerment event being shared widely. Curious, he clicked it. There she was, Anaya on stage, confident, smiling, dressed in white, holding the mic with ease. Her voice calm, her words powerful. She was telling her story, not with bitterness, but with conviction. She didn't mention his name, but he knew. Everyone who knew them would know Dot. She looked radiant. Her account had over 5K followers now. Her platform had launched a new mental wellness campaign. Her blog had been nominated for an award. Her life, her success, was out in the open for all to see. And not a trace of him was in it. For the first time, Daniel truly saw what he had given up, not just a wife, but a woman of quiet strength, deep empathy, and fierce loyalty. He saw everything she had become without him, and it burned. By regret and a fragile ego, he sent her a message. "I watched your video. I'm proud of what you've become. Would love to catch up if you're open to it." Anaya stared at the message for a long time. She felt no anger, no rush of hurt, just a soft, steady calm. She typed slowly, "Thank you for watching. I wish you healing. There's nothing left to catch up on. Take care." And with that, she closed the chat and deleted his number. That was her closure, not a dramatic confrontation. Not revenge, but the power of knowing she had risen so far beyond the pain he caused that his apology no longer held weight. She didn't need to prove anything to him. Her life was the proof. Rayan was not just Anaya's son, he was her anchor, her mirror, her reason, and her redemption. From the very first time she held him, his heartbeat against hers reminded her that life, even after devastation, could still be soft, sacred, and full of meaning. Their bond was more than mother and child, it was survivor and light. In his innocent laughter, she found healing. In his tiny hands reaching for her face, she felt needed, loved, chosen. And in his eyes, wide and curious, she rediscovered parts of herself she thought were lost forever hope. Playfulness, purpose, motherhood did not just change her, it sharpened her. It taught her that strength wasn't loud or boastful. Sometimes it was quiet perseverance, rocking a baby at 3 a.m. with tears in your own eyes, yet still whispering lullabies. It was working on client emails while feeding a toddler mashed bananas. It was smiling through exhaustion, showing up every single day when you had every excuse to stay down. With Rayon by her side, she no longer saw herself as broken. She saw herself as rebuilt, stronger than before, but softer in the right places. Emotionally, Anaya had grown into a woman of incredible self-awareness. Therapy, journaling, and speaking her truth had peeled away the guilt and shame she once carried. She no longer took blame for Daniel's choices. She understood now that people don't betray you because you lack something, they betray you because they do. Financially, she had reached a place of stability. Her platform was not just surviving, it was thriving. She had diversified her income, with courses, writing gigs, speaking engagements, and collaborations with brands that aligned with her values. She no longer feared bills or the future. Her bank account wasn't just filled with numbers, it represented freedom. And she earned every digit. Spiritually, she had made peace with her past. She reconnected with her faith, not through ritual, but through gratitude. Every prayer now began with thank you instead of why me. Her belief wasn't in perfection anymore, it was in progress, in growth, in grace. She had seen the worst life had to offer, and she had still chosen to believe in goodness. Her definition of love had changed too. It was no longer about butterflies or grand promises. To her, love was consistency. It was someone who showed up even on their worst days. Love was the ability to grow beside someone, not away from them. It was the kind of thing she was slowly teaching Rayan, even now as he learned how to walk, how to speak, how to love himself. Happiness. It no longer lived in someone else's hands. It lived in slow mornings, in solo coffee dates, in reading bedtime stories with silly voices. It lived in her independence, her small victories, her quiet confidence. It lived in knowing that she didn't need a partner to feel whole. To the women reading her story, she would say, yes, it hurts. Yes, you feel like your world is ending. Yes, it's unfair and cruel and exhausting, but this pain is not where your story ends. You are allowed to mourn, to rage, to collapse, but you are also allowed to rebuild, to dream again, to rise. Do not let betrayal define you. Let it refine you. You are not unworthy because someone failed to see your worth. You are not weak because someone mistook your kindness for fragility. Let your healing become your legacy. Don't rush the process. Don't perform strength for the world. Take your time, take your breath, take your truth, and make something beautiful out of it. And when the storm clears, and you look back on the ashes of the woman you used to be, smile. Because you'll know, sometimes life takes everything so it can give you more. Anaya hadn't just survived betrayal. She had alchemized it into power. And that is what made her unforgettable, not in Daniel's memory, but in the life she built, the child she raised, and the woman she had finally become.